Hi, everyone, and welcome to another very special Talk Insomnia episode. We have Ari with us. Welcome.
Hi, Daniel. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Very, very nice having you. And for those of you who don't know Ari, which is probably most of you, I'll just say that this episode came about because Ari had actually worked with one of our coaches, Coach Beth, and that's how I connected with Ari. And you actually volunteered to share your story, so I'm very grateful for that. And so, without further ado, tell us what happened. What was your story like, Ari?
Yeah, so it was a little less than a year ago, April of last year. Completely unassuming evening. Nothing in particular stressful happening in my life. My parents were in town, and I took them to an Oakland Roots soccer game. We have a professional soccer team in Oakland, and it was cold out, but not too cold. But I noticed sort of towards the end of the game, I started to feel a little sick, and got home. My parents said goodnight to my kids. They left. And I just started to get this sense that I wasn't going to sleep that night. It was like I had a sort of a chest congestion, a little bit of a headache, and it just didn't feel conducive to sleep, which was annoying. It was a Saturday night. Was looking forward to a good night's sleep, but have never had any particular sleep issues in my life, and have never really had any real sleep anxiety either. So my concerns were affirmed. I did not sleep that night at all. And then woke up Sunday, went about my day, still felt a little bit sick, was a little discomforted by the fact that I hadn't slept, but, had sleepless nights before, nothing I couldn't get over. Still didn't feel well the next night, and so I decided to take some cold medicine, and that worked in that it made me drowsy. I went to sleep, but I had this very dry night. Like my breathing was dry. I would wake up with dry mouth, so sleep was very choppy. Was able to sleep again, didn't have a lot of anxiety about it, but it was like, it's 2 nights in a row where I haven't slept well. One of them I didn't sleep at all. Surely Sunday night will be the night. And of course I have work Monday morning. And then didn't sleep at all Sunday night. And that was the beginning of this full blown, you've heard it many times, like, oh my God, something's wrong. Panic attack, just like full on, this is insomnia. This is what insomnia is, right? When people talk about insomnia, this is what they mean. And went to work on Monday, had that very unfamiliar sense of anxiety about everything. I don't suffer from sort of generalized anxiety, so it was a really unfamiliar feeling to me to have this just sort of bubbling up. And then and that was sort of the beginning of like a 10-day, I call it my 10-day bender, where I just basically did not sleep for 10 days. A little bit here and there, a couple hours, sure, probably more than I thought I did, but, never a comfortable night. At some point in there, I got a prescription to trazodone from my, had a telehealth visit, got a prescription to trazodone. Didn't really work. At least it didn't make me sleep comfortably. And so I knew I felt like I had been put to sleep by the drug, but it didn't really work. And so didn't feel good the next day. Last 10 days. And then at some point it just, I feel like it burned itself out. And then I had one relaxing night, slept well, and then was fine. And I think, as you call it, the truce period, where, felt like I could sleep again, got through this. Familiar with my body again, but it's still in the back of my mind. And about 3.5, 4 weeks later, get COVID. And we had been watching a basketball game at our neighbor's house. The neighbor calls a couple days later. It was my whole family was over with his family, and says, just let you know, my wife and one of my daughters tested positive. This was on a Wednesday. I immediately started to feel sick, like right when I got the text. Went home from work, tested positive, and I was the only one in my family to test positive at that point. But was feeling like sick, but not horrible. And again, got this feeling, all right, not going to sleep tonight. And that's when it really kicked in. So it was one bad night, one sleepless night, first night of COVID. On top of, and that was, additional anxiety there was trying not to get the rest of my family sick. And so it wasn't just about how am I going to feel, it's how do I avoid, spreading this throughout. And so all of the anxieties that I was already feeling, kicking back in from that previous 10-day bender were back, plus this new thing. And so, that got me, down this path again. And, so the interesting thing is it did not take me very long at all to start to find this sort of, this type of content. So I initially found Martin Reed, which I think a lot of people do. I sort of intuitively knew, having never had sleep problems, and having had this sort of brief experience with trazodone that didn't really work, that I needed to, this was something that I had to figure out in my head. I needed to go in that direction and not in I knew that sleep hygiene just intuitively sounded bad to me. If I've been sleeping well for 46 years of my life, there's no reason why I should need to take hot baths and drink tea and take supplements and pill, to start sleeping well. Now there's something happened. I need to figure out what that thing is and then get past it. And I had no idea what it was, but, so, looking for content that would actually sort of send me in that direction. That's when I found Martin Reed's podcast, and I started, binging his episodes, as a term that a lot of people use with these success stories, is you hear one and you have to hear another, and they're all kind of the same, but each of them are sort of individually inspirational and give you that little sense of, okay, I can do this. But the problem is they're so infrequent. He'll have one every month or 6 weeks or whatever, and so you go back so far, and then it sort of starts to feel dated. You're people who had this in 2018, it doesn't feel relevant anymore. And so, I thought I need more content. And I had found one of these CBT-I apps because I didn't want Martin Reed's program was too expensive to me. And also the one thing that he sort of was a proponent of that also didn't intuitively sound right to me was sleep restriction. Right when I heard the term and I thought about the concept, and I thought, I'm already as stressed out as I've ever been about something that is completely unrelated to anything else in my life. I don't have stress at work. I don't have stress at home. I mean, I have general stresses, but nothing out of the ordinary. Everything is there's nothing else I can point to except that sickness, the COVID, things that are temporary. And so I just kind of knew that if I could get through this very short period, if I could figure it out, I would be okay. So the sleep restriction didn't sound right. It felt like more stress on top of stress. So I find this app, the things that the app recommends are not particularly helpful. They're similar to sleep restriction. They're things that getting out of bed. They're all things that you can find just listening to a Martin Reed episode, or I hadn't discovered your content yet, but as a lot of the things that you talk about, just sort of allowing thoughts to be, and so very general stuff. But the biggest perk by far of this app was it connects you with a coach, and you get one live session, one video session, and then unlimited text. And so I got connected with Beth, which is the godsend of all godsends. I mean, I'm sure, having listened to a lot of the coaches on your podcast, I know they're all great. But I just Beth just instantly connected with me and was able to provide just the nugget, the pieces of information exactly when I needed them. And it was funny because I remember the second text I think I sent to her was I just unloaded, and I thought this is going to scare the hell out of her. She's never going to have dealt with anyone like me before. She's going to say this app isn't right for you. But I needed someone to just I needed to get it out there and figure out how bad it was. And she writes back and she says, everything you're going through is perfectly understandable. I've heard it a million times. I've been through it myself. I had insomnia for 40 years. These are all things that are perfectly natural to think about when you don't know what's going on and you think that something's wrong. And so that really started me down the path towards, quote unquote recovery. And this is just, 2 weeks into my second bender. So really insomnia is a brand new thing to me at this point, still, 6 weeks, 7 weeks old. And so I'll stop and
sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
Ari, but you already told us, like, the timeline is very clear to us.
Yeah.
We see where things are happening. The question I had before we go further in the story is, like, what are do you remember some of the things that you told her in that message that you thought made you like a kind of a unique case, and something very strange was happening?
Yeah, I basically said I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I am panicked like every night. Every night feels like I'm, one misstep away from calling 911. And I know, again, intuitively that is the wrong thing to do. That, like, going to an emergency room is not going to be the thing to help me, because there's nothing that they're going to do. But I don't know what else to do. I feel like I'm completely out of options. And again, I said, like, I realize people go through this for years and decades. For me, it's been 2 weeks, and I don't feel like I can take another night of it. So yeah, I mean, it was things that I think one of the things that Martin talks about in his podcast is that, like, insomnia presents itself. It's different for everyone, but it's the same thing. It's the same stories you hear, whether it's someone who's been going through it for decades or a few weeks. It's that level of just complete sort of out of body. What is happening to me? How am I going to get through this? So.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
One more quick thing is, like, how are you functioning at work daytime?
Yeah. Not horribly. Not great, but I also, having gotten enough content from Martin, I knew that, like, I was more capable than I thought of making it through my day. I definitely knew how to get through my day, and that it's at least the best distraction to sleep is to do things during your day that are familiar, comfortable, and enjoyable. And so at the very least, I'm not sitting at home stewing in my own inability to sleep, even if I'm not getting the answers I need, or I'm still worried. And so I at least felt I was doing the right thing by going to work. I called in sick one day, and that was a really bad decision. Just, couldn't take a nap, was worried about taking a nap. Should I take a nap? Which are not great conditions for napping. It was a real whirlwind in a short period of time.
Got it. Yeah, now it gives a very clear picture. And now you message Beth, and she's telling you that, no, I heard this many times. This must have felt reassuring, relief. But anyways, take us. What happened next?
Yeah. So I had this brings me to sort of early in the summer, and I had a couple of vacations coming up, 2 sort of 7 to 10 day vacations, one with my full family in Idaho, and another to visit my wife's family in Minnesota, and then driving up to Canada. And so my big concern here was just, like, how am I going to function on these vacations? Still not sleeping. I'm starting to understand what I'm getting the education that I need, but it's not translating into better sleep. And her responses are, at least you're not canceling your vacation. Just the fact that you are going through with it is comforting to me, because it's a sign that that that's the right thing to do, and that there's still opportunities, even if nothing improves, even if your sleep is terrible. There's still opportunities to connect with your family and have fun, and that you're, like, offering your kids a good time. And so, and so I sort of took it on as I may or may not sleep on this vacation. It may or may not be a great vacation, but I'm doing it. And I've already been through this experience of, the one thing that, was very comforting to me was, I knew that I wasn't going to have these panic attacks where I thought I needed to go to the hospital anymore. That was the worst of it. That was behind me. If I can get through that, I can get through any of it. They may be unenjoyable, uncomfortable. I got a lot of figuring out to do, but I'm not going to die. So that quite accurate. The first vacation, probably didn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours a night. Had, maybe one good night. And then, of course, the good night leads you to believe that you're on the path to recovery. And so the next night, which you don't sleep, you have the setback. And So I was dealing with all that, performance anxiety that you guys all talk about, and just sort of trying to accept that was how it was going to be. I was going to have performance anxiety after a good night's sleep, and then I might not sleep again. And so just, this pattern, it's an uncomfortable pattern, but this is the pattern until it's not. And then, so got through that vacation. The next one started about a week later. That's when we went to visit my wife's family. And then didn't sleep well in the Minnesota part of that first half of that trip. So this brings us to late June, early July. We go up to Canada. We're staying in this cabin on the water in the middle of nowhere in southern Ontario, which we've been to before. Amazing place to be in the summer. And didn't sleep well the first couple nights. And this is, I'm in a it's almost like a studio apartment with my wife and two kids. So we're all within, 20 to 30 feet of each other. And so waking up in the middle of the night, which I had been doing and reading and watching shows or whatever, was now going to be, I had to be sort of very quiet. And I had a little corner that I had set up like by the kitchen where I could have a lamp and read, but my activities were pretty limited. But by like the second or third night of that part of the trip, I was actually sleeping pretty well. Just like had one night where I didn't sleep for, it took me a while to get to sleep. But then when I fell asleep, I slept well, woke up feeling refreshed and thinking again, all right, maybe I'm on the path now. And then I actually did start to sleep well. And so through the app, I'm sort of relaying to Beth what each night is like. And so like, if it's a good night, I basically just write like slept well, didn't have much anxiety. And she would respond with a little flower. And then, so after about a week, so then I get back home feeling better, still like not sure about what's going on, but I think I'm in a truce phase, but one where I'm better educated about what's happening. And then she says, so I think it's time to talk about, not setbacks. What's the word you guys use?
Speed bumps.
Speed bumps. Thank you. I think it's time to talk about speed bumps. And she said, I'm not warning you about them. I'm not suggesting one's going to happen, but I just want you to know that everyone I've ever worked with has them, and that these are the things to look for, so that when you have one, because you will, that you're not starting from ground zero. You're not starting from zero. You're not starting from scratch. All these things are still there. But it may feel, initially it may feel like everything is worse than it ever was. Because now I've been through all this and I still can't, I'm still having sleepless nights. And then, so all the worry comes back. So she was completely right. It started a couple days later. And then, and that phase of like speed bumps, well, a good week, a bad week, a good few days, a bad few days lasted several more months. Certainly into, September, October of last year. So again, the timeline being April beginning, May beginning in earnest, and now we're in sort of September, October, and I'm well on my way to, recovery, but having these speed bumps that can be very, very painful. In August, we moved just a mile away, but a full house move with two kids and a wife, and the thing that I hate most in life, moving. And sort of successfully doing that was a huge relief, and is one of those things I can always look back on and say, like, in the midst of all of that, I managed to move my entire house, and then there it was sort of being in a new house. It was then not sleeping well a couple nights. Oh God, this new house is haunted. And then sleeping well a few nights out. This house is amazing. It's got all the comforts I need. And then a couple, and then just over time, those things start to dissipate, and it just, So I'll stop there. You'll probably ask me how I found your content, which is in the midst of all this. But before I ramble more, I'll pass it back to you.
Oh no, thank you. You're a great storyteller. You told it so nicely. And the question that came to my mind was during this period from, let's say, July or so to like maybe September, October, or at that time frame anyway, did it feel like things were sort of like overall gradually getting easier, or did it not feel like that until there was kind of like a final moment where, okay, now things are changed? How did it feel like?
There's definitely no final moment. And I think that's one thing that, Beth talks a lot about, and I know others do too, is, there's no point, there's no trophy, there's no cake, there's no like celebration for having, it's, I'm still waiting for that. It just, the patterns become more familiar, and the recognition that I've done this before, I've made it through a full week of hard work without sleep. So the worst that can happen is I don't sleep well and I make it through work, and everything is fine. It just doesn't feel good. That's the worst that can happen. And so just, again, knowing that you sort of raise the floor of the experience to the point where the floor starts to meet, I wouldn't say it doesn't meet the ceiling, but it sort of starts to meet, an average day. And so, having a bad night and then having a perfectly normal day reduces the anxiety the following night. And yes, I have been able to sleep through anxiety, as you've suggested, is very possible. It's just nice to have lower levels of anxiety in general. And so being able to just keep the anxiety levels down, just no matter what happens, is it's just sort of been a steady improvement. And then, I listened to the conversation you had with Michelle on earlier this week about talking about your books, the books you're reading. And that was Michelle, right?
Yeah, that was Michelle.
Yeah. And the book that it's funny, the book that she was talking about, the Sarah Wilson book, my wife has actually been reading. But she talked about, the monster, like the feeling that there's a monster, and that like the further you get into sort of understanding what's happening, you realize there is no monster. And I've been thinking like that is, it's exactly what I've been thinking. I've called it the enemy. Like, early in insomnia, when you sort of wake up after that hour of uncomfortable sleep, and it just feels like you're surrounded by this thing that's pushing you down. It feels like there's this real life enemy. And like coming to learn over time that there is no enemy. Like there's nothing there. And so it doesn't matter, like if you wake up in the middle of the night or have a sleepless night, there's nothing there. And so again, doesn't mean that it's going to be fun. Doesn't mean that, there's not going to be some level of anxiety about having not slept. And does this mean something? You just know that it doesn't have any real implications, and you can kind of laugh about it,
Yeah, that's so helpful when you can start, when that can start happening, you can laugh about experiences. That's so nice. And something I thought about here was one, just an expression, like it was somebody actually in our immunity program that I don't know where she had gotten this from, but she had said that somebody had said that insomnia sort of like sneaks out the back door, and very much like you said. And I felt there was one other thing. Well, I did want to ask you, like, how was it Beth that tipped you off about our content, or?
Yeah. So as you know, you exist in a very small world, so I had found your podcast in the process of when I was back in the phase of I need more than just this like Martin Reed, once every whatever. I need more like regular and not just. It would be nice if it's not just success stories, and so unfortunately, there's a ton of really awful content out there about sleep and insomnia, and again, like at this point, it wasn't just intuitive. I knew most of it was terrible, so I kind of knew what I was looking for, and I stumbled on your Sleep Coach School podcast, clicked on it. I don't know if it was the latest episode or it was a completely random episode. I certainly wasn't looking for a playlist or anything specific. I just wanted some level of comfort at that point. And it may have been Michelle then, I'm not sure, but it was one of the coaches that you had on, and you were talking. It was more of a discussion than an interview, but she was talking about sleep restrictions and saying how it's not an essential piece of insomnia recovery, and I had still been in this phase of, CBT-I is the way. Like that's the way I'm going to get through it, even if I disagree with sleep. Like I can't do sleep restriction. I generally was getting out of bed in the middle of the night if I, had, half an hour. I wasn't timing it, but if I was feeling anxiety in bed, I would get out. And she just sort of started to unwind some of those things. Like that's not at all what's important. What's important is that you just start to recognize what those feelings are and the insignificance of them, and however best to do that. And sleep restrictions work really well for some people who, we've talked about this before, who could use that structure and use the sort of discipline of, boom, 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 boom. They sort of their life is chaotic and they need something to just settle it down. And so settling it down means I'm going to bed at 11, waking up at 5 or whatever. I didn't feel like I needed that. And so her mentioning that you can do all these things without the sleep restriction, I thought, oh my God, this is I need like the content, but not the rules. And so I just started listening to more of them. And then I thought there was one, maybe the second or third one I listened to where you or whoever you were talking to mentioned Coach Beth. And I thought it's got to be the same person. Like, you didn't mention the last name, but this world is too small for it to be a different Coach Beth. And so I just Googled your name and her name, and the episode that you had done with her came up. And so I watched that, and that was like phenomenal. It was everything I already knew, but it was just great to hear it, live, or, hear her voice and your voice. And she mentioned having read Set It and Forget It. This will walk me up to how I connected with you. Set It and Forget It, and that it was great and like changed her whole, course of recovery. So I, of course, went and downloaded the book that night when I couldn't sleep, and, read it in like 3 nights, and had the same reaction. But what I emailed you about first was, I'm confused because in Set It and Forget It, you're big on sleep restriction. And now I'm listening to these podcasts and they're sort of anti-sleep restriction. So I just need you to reconcile that for me. And you said, thanks for being in touch. Really great question. I answer these types of questions on my Wednesday podcast, or, these are the programs. So I went to the Wednesday podcast and asked it, and you give a very nice answer, just sort of about like sort of acknowledging your development, or your sort of the path of your sort of viewpoints in the space, and having basically learned from patients, which is kind of not patients, learn from
students,
clients.
Followers, clients,
yeah. Which, and that also sort of got me thinking, or reminded me, pushed me further down the path of this really is not a medical issue at all. And so if we stop, and this takes us, towards a conversation we had previously, but, just if you take this outside of the realm of it's a medical problem, how do we fix it? And these are thought patterns, these are patterns of energy. How do you sort of lower the temperature in your mind, just cool all of that, become comfortable with what's happening. There are no medical issues to be resolved. And so, and then I ended up reading, This is Nato, is that the name of it? Yeah. And so then it started to become a little more clear. But.
Very, very nice. So glad you connected with that. I didn't know that. I assumed that actually Beth told you about this. So that's funny how you must have been surprised, or
a little surprised, but again, it was like, the surprising thing to this day is how small this world is. Because one of the things I told Beth initially was, what's so puzzling about having been through the panic, and the first thing people do, at least first thing I did and others do when they're panicking, is they go to Google and they type in, what do I do when I'm panicking from insomnia? Or can panic from insomnia cause, can it be a full-blown panic attack? And the things you get in the Google searches are just terrible. I mean, they're completely unhelpful. They're either completely unhelpful or they're wrong. And then to sort of hear conversations, where people talk about it in a very real life context of, you just sort of let it pass. And then you realize that you're not going to die. And so then it becomes easier each time it happens. And then along the sort of road to understanding that, you're understanding all these other things about what's happening. But there's no Google response that helps with, like, that sends you down that path. So just like having listened to Beth and having listened to Martin Reed, I just knew there had to be this community somewhere. But the surprising thing was, like, there was such a small community.
Yeah, no, it's still is very small. And I think, as we know, like, sleep is it's kind of big business. It's a big industry, and also, like, a lot of the confusing things and the misunderstandings have been around for, like, decades. So it will take a while for it to change, but hopefully things will trend in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and again, I've told you this before, but I think, like, that it's sort of why it's so interesting, and perhaps important to me that you are a former doctor, so you can sort of advocate for this for everyone else. That I have seen I've seen the other way for many, many years, for many, many patients, for thousands of patients. I've seen it, I've experienced, and if it worked, then I'd still be doing that. But I know you're very cautious about saying that you're not providing medical advice, but it's all, the more and more I hear your shows, it's like, it doesn't even matter. It isn't medical advice. It's just, this is what insomnia is. And it's not those things it's not those things that you thought it was.
No, I think, to me, it really is, for some of our people tuning in here who are new to our channel, this might sound like, oh, that's too simple, Daniel. But, like, I think it's really like this. It's a misunderstanding. Like, it's a misunderstanding in our brains, like, safety system. And the key is really education, and then, of course, support, guidance too. Like, but really, education is so helpful, I think.
Yeah, and I think I think you talk about as your first principle being effortlessness, and it can sound like such an abstract concept if you just come to it blindly of, what you need to do is do less. But I got to do something. How can I not do anything? And so then you sort of, you work towards the point where you do less. Like, you put in the hard work to understand that I don't need to do any work. And it's completely counterintuitive to just about everything else in our lives. Which is why it's so important that it not be viewed as a medical problem, because if it is, then we treat it like everything else, and it's not everything else.
Yeah.
And this is not medical advice coming from someone who's never been to med school and will never go to med school.
No, I think it's you're pointing out this paradox so nicely, and people often ask me that. They're like, "Hey, Daniel, you're talking about how, like, insomnia can happen when we pay, like, so much attention to our sleep, but isn't, like, tuning into this channel, reading your books, or going through a program, am I not paying more attention?" And I say exactly what you say. I said, like, sometimes we have to put in a little effort to arrive where there's no effort. Learn that there's nothing more to learn. Understand, and so it's a little paradoxical, but yeah, I think this is the way.
Yeah. And then, and then you can sort of choose whether you want to keep learning or not. Right. And I think, for me, it's just a really interesting subject matter. So now I sort of treat it as, I'm learning just as I, would learn about anything else that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of expanding your brain, expanding your experience.
And I guess, I have a few more questions, but one of them being from the fall and until now, things have been pretty easy, or any speed bumps, or how things been going?
Yeah, I mean, the last significant speed bump, the last one that was more than, I would say, like a day or two, was in October, and it was 4 or 5 days of very little sleep, and you just get up. I binged a show, and I just knew, it was like, eventually this will burn itself out soon, and I'll get over it, and I'll be back. But it feels really awful right now, so I'm going to go watch a show that I've been wanting to watch. And since then, there have been plenty of sleepless nights, plenty of uncomfortable nights, but nothing. When I think about it in the morning, to the degree I do, it's normally this is the type of bad night I would have had before I had sleep problems. I just never would have put any consideration into it. Like having a bad night of sleep every 2 weeks for me was not uncommon, whether it's from just, caffeine or having slept late the night before or stress. Completely normal for me to have a bad night every couple of weeks and then just get through the day and sleep great the next night. So again, I know it to be true when it happens. It doesn't mean that I think about it the same way I did in the before. But it just, again, like the floor continues to get higher about, how bad the day can possibly be after a bad night. So yeah, I still think about, I probably think about it a lot more because I still engage with the content. So, there's sort of a chicken egg issue there, but I'm okay with that. I'm still okay. I'm also okay with allowing myself a little bit of, using the content as a little bit of a crutch to just maintain that comfort level. I figure that it's part education, it's part comfort, but I'm okay with doing it. I don't need to cut myself off from it just to try and go cold turkey.
Makes so much sense. And when you said the part where you said in the past I would have maybe a choppy night every 2 weeks or something like that, it just completely randomly, literally this night, last night, I think I was up from 2 a.m. and I don't think I slept more. I probably slept 3 hours last night just because I was stressed about some things I have going on, just to normalize it. Yeah, it happens to every one of us. But yeah, now my two last questions to you are, if you could, go back in time and talk to yourself when this was starting to, you had those first couple of benders, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, I think the one thing would be this process is going to be hard but interesting. And so there will be there's a lot to learn here. And so appreciate it for that, despite how difficult it is. I don't know if that would have helped me if I'm putting myself in the situation. Then hearing that, I'm not sure if that would be helpful. But it definitely, when I got to the point in short order where I realized I was learning a lot, it did help, and it is sort of the the double-edged sword to this is, I feel like this is really interesting stuff, and so at least as much as it sucks, it's interesting. And then the other is, so I read one of the books I read in this process was the Claire Weeks book. I'm forgetting the title, but
Hope and Healing for Your Nerves, maybe.
Yeah, that and. So much great stuff in there. It's probably the only self-help book I've ever read. I wouldn't put yours in the category of self-help, but maybe. But she wrote that I think in the 90s, 80s or 90s.
Back, yeah.
And so some of the stuff feels a little outdated, but the just the very simple process of when I feel what a panic attack is, which is it is just nervous energy, and the way that there are these three ways to deal with nervous energy. And one of them, the one that stuck with me most, is just float. And so you have these feelings and just close your eyes or don't close your eyes and just try to float. And that has been so tremendously helpful. Just that very simple concept. So I think the synopsis of that I would tell myself is, what you're feeling is just a pattern of energy. There's nothing more to it than that. And that energy is what is keeping you up and making you feel so abnormal. But there's no enemy.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And then finally, and you kind of, this kind of segues nicely because you said part of the thing you might say to yourself is that there's a lot you'll learn from this, which leads to my final question, which is have you learned things that applied, in other areas of life?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so I said I'd never experienced generalized anxiety, but I've certainly had I definitely get the feelings of the Sundays and the Mondays, or that, that sadness of that, just overbearing sadness of a vacation's ending or a week is ending. And I don't know what to do with this. Do I go exercise? But the feeling of having to do something to fix that really sad feeling that we all have. And now just having sort of this, it's the same tools to understanding what that is, and that it really is nothing more than energy, like going through your nerves, and different kind of energy. But that energy just changes all the time. And it goes from feeling good to feeling bad to feeling neutral. And we all know that intuitively, because we feel good, we feel bad, we feel neutral. But in the moment, it feels like you can't get past it. And so recognizing that you don't need to get past it has been, I think it's so helpful in so many ways. And just being present with my kids, being present with my wife, but far from perfect with any of that. But just recognizing that I can just sit here and let these feelings exist, and I don't have to do anything with them, is I think it's a life lesson.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Yeah. I think it's perfect place to end. So I'll just say again that so nice you connected with us and Beth, and thanks so much for being here and sharing your story today, Ari.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Really love the content, as I've told you several times, and we'll continue to engage.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch. Okay.
All right,
Bye,
thanks
everyone.
a lot.